Tessa Monroe knew the sky wasn't right. Out on the ridgeline above New Klamath, the wind had dropped without warning. Clouds froze in place, like paint smeared across glass. Her weather drone, still tethered to its tripod, pulsed blue and silent, refusing to transmit. At her feet, the grass had started leaning toward the treeline, as if it, too, sensed something approaching. She tapped her comm. "Hal, do you see this?" Static. Then, yeah. Magnetometers going wild. Radiation spiking, but there's no storm on any chart. "I don't like this, Tess." "I'll pack up," she said, crouching to pull the tripod legs from the dirt. But before her hands could reach the clamps, the ground dropped away. No tremor, no sound. Just absence, like someone had cut a piece of the world out from under her. Light went with it. The trees vanished, then the horizon, then even the pressure inside her ears. For one terrifying second, she was falling without air, without sky, without weight. Then she was lying on something warm. The light here was dim and sourceless, trickling from the walls like moisture. The room curved inward, with no corners or seams. Her mouth tasted of metal and ash. She sat up slowly. Across from her, Halvirin was slumped on a low bench made of the same bone-colored material as the floor. His glasses were gone, and a thin mesh band wrapped his wrist, blinking gently with unreadable glyphs. "Tess," he said, groggy. "You okay?" "Define okay." A panel hissed open without sound, and something entered. It moved on 6 limbs, but it wasn't insectal. The limbs folded and adjusted as needed, supporting a body that seemed to twist with each step. Its face, or the closest approximation of one, was hidden beneath a shield of segmented plates. From a port in its chest emerged a glowing sphere that hovered toward them and began to pulse. Language, not spoken, impressed directly into thought. "You were chosen. Unplanned but useful. Conflict requires minds outside protocol. You will serve." Hal stood or tried to. "Serve what?" The being didn't answer. It turned and left through the same wall that had opened for it, which closed behind with a shimmer like heated air. The sphere remained. It spun, faster now, and a stream of symbols spiraled around it. Images followed, worlds cracking open, fleets colliding in orbit, creatures wrapped in armor and rage. A war was unfolding across systems neither of them had ever heard of. And now, Earth was caught in the margins of its fury. Tessa stared at the display. "We've been abducted into someone else's war." Hal nodded, face pale. "And they don't even think we matter enough to explain it." The sphere pulsed once more. "No one remains uninvolved. Not anymore." The ship drifted through violet mist, its hull more bone than metal, its size unknowable from within. There were no windows, only projections, and even those offered little context, just slashes of light, the occasional outline of something larger slipping through the void. Tessa leaned against a rail that may or may not have been grown rather than built. "Are we prisoners or guests?" Hal examined the circular glyphs rotating along his wristband. "Not sure yet. If we're guests, they're not exactly rolling out the welcome mat." The door irised open once more, and the 6-limbed figure returned. This time, it was accompanied by 2 others, each taller, with irregular plating and strange vascular lines glowing through their torsos. The sphere floated behind them like an obedient insect. "You could try speaking," Tessa muttered. The lead figure raised 1 limb, and the sphere pulsed again. "You are designated as minds of adaptive species 3A. Humanity was omitted from formal listings due to irrelevance. This has changed." "Thanks," Hal said dryly. "The Orvan Accord is ruptured." A representative of the TCHARYSS Compact deployed a stellar harrow aimed at your solar body. Tessa frowned. "Our sun?" "Affirmative. Intercepted before core ignition. Intent clear. Earth no longer sits outside influence. You are now participants." The projection changed, displaying a split screen of 2 massive fleets locked in slow advance. The Kryn assembly, Tessa guessed that was who their hosts were, occupied one side, a shifting wall of bone-like constructs, each warship shaped like a crescent or a curled claw. The THRYSS Compact's fleet was more jagged, almost fungal, built from unknown materials with hints of motion where there should have been none. "This is a full-scale war," Hal murmured. "How long?" "Cycle count since breach, 0032. THRYSS claim provocation. Kryn suspect manipulation. You were taken due to unpredictability." Tessa laughed once, short and bitter. "You kidnapped us for our randomness? Adaptability is a resource. Earth will provide insight or perish." A second display bloomed beside the first. It showed Earth's atmosphere from orbit, then the continents as seen by a drone, peaceful, unaware. Then came overlays of projections, debris fields, orbital decay, radiation bands slicing across cities. The implication was clear. "You're using fear," Hal said. "Coercion." "No," Tessa muttered, her voice low. "They're telling us the cost of doing nothing." Hal turned toward her. "We don't even know the rules, Tessa." "Then we learn. Fast." The tall Kryn stepped forward. Its armor, or skin, she still wasn't sure, peeled back just enough to reveal a seed-like object embedded in its sternum. It tapped the device. A moment later, two similar seeds dropped from the sphere and hovered in front of them. Implantation enables command access. Simulation. Tactics. Shared thought. Without it, survival is unlikely. Hal looked at his. "And if we say no, you will be returned to Earth. Vulnerable. Unused. Forgotten." The projection faded. The sphere dimmed. The room fell into a humming silence. Tessa held her implant in one hand. It was warm. It pulsed slightly like it recognized her. She didn't look at Hal as she spoke. "Give it to me. Let's see what these things think I can do." Tessa woke with her hands clenched into the bedding, breath shallow, every nerve alive. Her vision adjusted slowly. The chamber she lay in pulsed with colorless light, its surfaces alive with shifting symbols. She wasn't restrained, but her body didn't quite obey either. The implant, seed, device, whatever it truly was, had been inserted just beneath the skin near her right clavicle. It itched, not like a wound, more like something learning its place. A whisper slid into her awareness, not spoken language, but suggestion. Shapes, patterns. A net of thought draped over her own. She could feel it already. Structures unfolding in her memory that weren't hers, at least not before. Tactical overlays. Enemy forms. Starship silhouettes rendered with obsessive clarity. Hundreds of engagements, most ending badly, flickered across her vision in bursts she couldn't control. Across the room, Hal sat on a floating bench, a faraway look in his eyes. His implant glowed faintly beneath his shirt. "You okay?" she asked. He turned to her slowly. "There's a framework, a history. It's not just a language bridge. It's grafting raw memory. I know how to pilot something called a fire lens without ever touching the controls." Tessa stood, her balance oddly perfect. "What is that?" "Long-range artillery platform. Looks like a spine with thrusters." "Sounds lovely." The room responded to her movement. Panels slid open with wet clicks. A corridor curved outward, lit by no visible source. They followed it instinctively, the implants nudging them toward some goal. Soon they reached a vast chamber, more alive than constructed. At its center hovered a training pod the size of a shuttle. The Kryn term for it translated loosely as the sphere of regret. Tessa stepped inside. The world dissolved. She stood in a burnt red valley under a sun that crackled like fire. Alien terrain stretched in every direction, trenches, broken towers, hulking machines buried halfway in the sand. Kryn units ran beside her, fluid in motion, communicating with flashes of light through their armor. Ahead, the THRSS approached, thin, angular beings with insectal armor that pulsed like breathing skin. Their weapons warped the air. Tessa ducked as a bolt of plasma tore past her ear. She reached for a weapon she hadn't known she carried. The moment her hand touched it, it clicked into memory. She fired. A THROSS scout fell, limbs twitching. Her mind reeled, not from guilt, but from how natural it felt. Outside the pod, how steadied a screen showing her vitals, overlaid with fluctuating symbols. A Kryn engineer, smaller than the warriors, its posture less rigid, stood beside him. "You're linking us to your network," Hal said. "But you're not just teaching. You're watching." The Kryn made no move to deny it. Instead, it placed 2 digits against the console and transferred a stream of data into Hal's implant. Blueprints, biological overlays, something else, molecular maps of human neural tissue with points tagged in violet. "Why are you scanning us?" he asked. "Compatibility exceeds projections. Human cognition permits adaptation of dormant relic tech." Hal blinked. "What relics?" The Kryn didn't answer. It simply turned and left. When Tessa emerged from the pod, her hair clung to her face and her shoulders ached. But her stance had changed. She no longer moved like someone caught in the middle of something. She moved like someone ready to answer it. "You're quiet," she said to Hal. He hesitated. "They think we can use Veari systems." She frowned. "The Veari are dead. Not to them. Not if pieces of that species are still buried in us." Tessa looked down at her hands. "What exactly have we been drafted into?" Hal met her eyes. "A war, and something older hiding behind it." The Vuran's wake dropped from fold space into orbit around Ember Spire, a jagged moon crackling with static storms and heat flares that painted its surface in molten veins. The Kryn called it a dead shard, but Tessa suspected that was more metaphor than geology. Nothing truly dead should pulse like that. Aboard the ship's forward hangar, Tessa fastened her harness without ceremony. The drop suit clung to her limbs as if grown directly from the bulkhead. The interior sealed with a low-pressure hiss, and new data flooded her implant. Layout schematics of the surface vaults, enemy positions last confirmed, seismic drift probabilities. "You sure you want to do this?" Hal stood just beyond the deployment gate, no suit, no weapons, just the glowing bands around his temples that marked him as support class. "Want has nothing to do with it," Tessa replied. "They think I'm useful on the ground, and I need to see what this war looks like without filters." Hal didn't argue. He never did when her voice dropped like that. A trio of Kryn formed up beside her, one tall and armored with ceremonial etchings, another hunched with limb extensions that crackled, and the third, he was different. Caver. He hadn't spoken to her yet. His armor was dull, scratched, repaired by hand. He bore no rank symbols, and no one seemed to command him. But when he moved, even the other Kryn made room. The shuttle released them with a subtle jolt. Below, Ember Spire's clouds twisted into spirals around glowing ridgelines. As they descended, static began to chew at her heads-up display. Visual contact blurred. Audio drifted into distortion. Still, the mission path held steady in her mind, etched into her nervous system like instinct. They landed near Vault Entry 7, a fractured canyon pitted with blast scars. Tessa stepped out into a windless silence. The sky here didn't feel real. Everything shimmered with heat, but nothing moved. Inside the vault, darkness didn't come in shades, it swallowed. Even the Kryn's helmet lights barely pierced it. They pressed deeper, past broken pylons and tunnels sealed with biological growth. The THROSS had been here recently. Tessa touched a spore wall. It recoiled. She drew her blade, not metal, but something forged from Kryn memory clay, and signaled for the team to move forward. They found the node room half collapsed, filled with ruined drones and pulsing vents. But worse was what floated near the core, a lattice of shapes, organic and mechanical, twitching as if dreaming. The Kryn called it the Enthal, adaptive sentience birthed from both sides' discarded technologies. No orders, No allegiance. Just evolution and hunger. The Enthel moved first. Tendrils lashed from above. One Kryn vanished into the ceiling. Another was thrown against a bulkhead, so hard his armor fractured like pottery. Caver dove rolled and slashed upward through a stalk of tissue. Tessa activated her implant's tactical node. Her vision split, real-time on the left, predictive on the right. She moved between outcomes like water, ducking, turning, striking where the Enthel hadn't yet thought to block. Her blade sank into a pulsing knot. The room shrieked, not sound, but a pressure in her head that almost dropped her to her knees. The core flared, then dimmed. The Enthel collapsed inward, folding like a dying insect. Tessa crouched beside the Kryn who'd been thrown, still breathing barely. Caver approached her through the smoke. "You fight," he said. "Didn't have a choice." He tilted his head, then offered a single nod. Back aboard the Viren's wake, Hal met her at the medbay doors. "I read everything through your feed. That thing, the Enthel, it matched data from something else. Veari design. Old, but not extinct." Tessa stripped the suit from her arms. "So that's the war now. Not Kryn versus THRYSS, but everything old trying to crawl back. Maybe not just trying." Hal's voice dropped. "Maybe being called." Hal didn't sleep much after Ember Spire. Not that the Viren's wake offered much rest. The ship pulsed with low-frequency murmurs, faint vibrations always moving beneath the floors. Kryn crew operated in near silence, their communication channeled through implants and neural loops. Tessa had adapted. Hal hadn't. He still needed voices, faces, explanations that didn't arrive in riddles or visions. His latest request had been granted without context: transport to Verinder 3, a world marked for decommission. Once a Kryn archive moon, now hollowed out by age and neglect. The Kryn said it held nothing useful. That alone made Hal suspicious. The descent was quiet. No welcoming party, no escort, just the hiss of landing gear on frozen dust. He stepped onto the surface, wearing a thermal exosuit patched together from Kryn reserves and Earth-standard materials. It didn't fit well, but it worked. Verinder 3's surface looked stripped. Once glorious towers now stood like ribs poking from a sunken carcass. Craters had become frozen lakes. Dust storms came and went with no rhythm. But underneath, the forges still breathed. Hal followed the map carved into his implant, reaching a fractured tunnel marked as Archive Node 17. Inside, the temperature rose. Ice gave way to rust-colored stone and bone metal plating. He passed murals of figures with limbs like calligraphy, Veari maybe, or something older. Their faces were all missing. At the heart of the chamber lay a box. Simple. Unearthed. Not locked. He didn't touch it immediately. Instead, he ran a scanner. Organic trace. Memory thread structure. Veari signature confirmed. He reached for it. The moment his fingers grazed the surface, it bloomed. Not light memory. He wasn't in the chamber anymore. He stood in a field of violet grass beneath two suns. A Veari stood across from him, translucent and tall, composed of lines rather than mass. It stared with no visible eyes. Your kind were given a chance. It said, not in speech, but in the rhythm of breath and heartbeat. You were seated not as an experiment, but as a bridge. We failed. You may not. Hal tried to speak. Nothing came out. The Veari extended one hand, not toward him, but into him. A stream of symbols filled his mind. Schematics. Languages. Moments of ruin and repair. Then one image burned brighter than the rest. A child, half human, half something else, standing in front of a fractured sphere surrounded by both Kryn and THRYSS alike. The child spoke, and the armies lowered their weapons. The image shattered. Hal dropped to one knee as the chamber returned. The box was gone. In its place, a whisper from his implant. Upload complete. Memory relic transferred. Caution advised. Back on the ship, he called for Tessa. She arrived in her undersuit, drying her hair with a strip of mesh fiber. "You look like you saw a ghost," she said. "I did," Hal replied, "and it left me a message." He activated the projection. The image of the child returned. Even Tessa, hardened by combat and alien war forms, went still. "Is that us?" "No," Hal said, "but it could be." Outside the chamber, the Kryn engineer who had granted Hal access stood still, head lowered. Its eyes, buried beneath protective glass, narrowed. Within its own network, it began sending fragments of the relic's data to higher channels. Somewhere across the void, a different mind stirred. The ring world of Drentol glittered like a fractured crown in the void, vast and dying. Once a meeting ground for neutral diplomacy, now it was half-darkened, only a fraction of its arc still lit by solar relays. The rest drifted in silence, patrolled by drones with broken logic cores and damaged translation banks. Tessa stepped off the Kryn transport onto one of the remaining active platforms. Her mission had been clear: rendezvous with a mid-tier assembly negotiator to discuss limited ceasefire terms. But everything about the location felt off. Too quiet, too thinly staffed. Even the escort team had been reduced to a pair of low-ranking Kryn, who kept their eyes low and their weapons deactivated. Kaver had wanted to come. The request had been denied. She scanned the docking bay once more. No signs of damage. No immediate threat. Still, something prickled at the base of her skull. Not fear, not warning, but friction. The implant unsettled. Tessa walked toward the designated meeting room, passing through corridors that smelled faintly of metal fatigue and burnt carbon. Lights flickered. Panels cracked. Her every step echoed too loud. The room, when she entered, was empty. Not just vacant, scrubbed. No furniture. No projection nodes. Just the bare walls of a once diplomatic chamber. And on the far wall, someone had etched a symbol she didn't recognize. A circle fractured down the middle, its pieces spinning just slightly out of sync. The door sealed behind her. She turned immediately, hand on her sidearm, but she was already too late. The air shimmered. Two THRSS scouts emerged from the cloaking field, bodies stretched and angular, armor grown to match their skeletal frames. One lifted a weapon. Tessa fired first. Her shot tore through its shoulder, sending it spinning. The second leapt sideways, claws raking the wall, and lunged. The implant surged. Time split. She moved faster than thought, ducking and driving her knee into the creature's torso. Her blade found the gap at the base of its throat. When it collapsed, it crumpled like empty cloth, lighter than it should have been. A shape moved behind her. She pivoted and fired again. Not a THRSS. A Kryn. An admiral. Someone she'd briefed with 2 days earlier. He fell without sound, 2 clean shots to the chest. His armor crumpled inward like an insect crushed underfoot. The ring world alarms activated 5 seconds later. She sprinted back toward the docking bay, only to find her shuttle already rising, leaving her behind. A low thrum echoed from overhead. Defense grids powering on. Her implant pulsed. External command override. Lockout in progress. Who the hell ordered this? She didn't have time to guess. A pressure vent exploded above, shredding the catwalk. She dropped, rolled, fired upward, but no more hostiles came. A hatch groaned open beside her. Kaver. He stood in the mouth of a battered THRSS-built escape pod, holding onto the rail with one arm, other hand extended toward her. "They sold you," he said. "We take the long way out." Tessa didn't hesitate. She grabbed his arm, pulled herself aboard, and the pod sealed shut. The interior was crude, bone panels and fungus-powered systems, but it worked. As they jettisoned from Drentol, Tessa slumped against the curved wall, panting. "That admiral," she said. "He gave them my location." Kaver nodded once. "Faction within assembly. Old blood. They fear what you carry." "I don't even know what I carry." He didn't answer. Outside the viewport, Two THRSS interceptors gave chase. The escape pod began to shake. Caver grunted and locked into the pilot's chamber, his fingers interfacing with the strange controls. Tessa rose and strapped in beside him, then reached into a side compartment where a relic weapon sat. Something not Kryn, not THRSS, and certainly not human. It pulsed faintly when she touched it. "Then let's give them something to fear back," she muttered. The pod surged forward into the drift, engines screaming. The escape pod drifted on fumes. 3 systems offline. 1 barely functional. The emergency veil, an organic cloak spun from THRSS material, had held long enough to slip past the interceptor patrols. But now, as the stars thinned and the gravitational hum of the sector faded behind them, it became clear the pod wouldn't make another jump. They coasted through the dead zone, a patch of ancient space littered with defunct satellites and the remnants of old wrecks. Silent wars had once been fought here. No one came now, not Kryn, not THRSS. It was a graveyard. Tessa floated near the central chamber, one arm braced against the bulkhead. The relic weapon rested on her lap, folded into a state of waiting. She hadn't tried to fire it again since Drentol. It hadn't needed prompting when it first awakened. It had simply acted. "Where are we going?" she asked. Caver, still locked into the pilot cradle, didn't answer immediately. The console blinked with unfamiliar geometry, THRSS navigational code, bent through a Kryn interface. "Old relay station," he said at last. "Verinder string node. Mostly collapsed, but one core still spins. Your companion left a trace there." "How?" Tessa sat upright. He accessed the Veari archive. "Yes." And something responded. "Now others listen." The station came into view 5 hours later. It resembled a rusted bloom, petals of scorched alloy open to the void. They docked with the least damaged section, entering through a breached hangar partially frozen in vacuum. Inside, it was darker than the vaults beneath Ember Spire. No lights, no automated systems, just the sound of their breath and the faint crackle of power trickling through ancient veins. Tessa's implant sparked once. Direction. She followed it. The passage narrowed, then bent downward into a chamber lined with mirrored slabs. Not reflective, absorptive. They drank in the light from her headlamp, leaving only faint contours. At the room's center, a single pedestal empty. And yet, when she stepped closer, her implant reacted violently. Presence confirmed. Identity uncertain. Translation partial. Then the voice came. It wasn't speech, not exactly. Not thought either. It was closer to a third thing, a remembered truth whispered from something too large to wear a face. "You are not what they hoped for," it said, "but you are what remains." Tessa's knees nearly buckled. Her hands braced against the pedestal as a stream of data poured into her awareness, faster than anything she'd felt in training or battle. It came as fragments, incomplete but heavy. Images, Kryn cities floating over magma flows. THRYSS hatching grounds built in the shadows of collapsed stars. Vari shrines where machines wept and remembered. Then came one final vision. A battlefield unlike any she had seen, cold, barren, stripped of context. In its center, a figure stood. Not her, not Hal, not Kryn or THRYSS, but something human-shaped, wrapped in a second skin of energy and metal, hands raised, not to strike, but to link. The armies paused, and in that silence, the war cracked open, not in death, but in stillness. Back in her body, Tessa staggered back. Caver caught her. "You saw it," he said. "I don't know what I saw," she muttered. "The relics want something returned." Tessa looked down at her hands. "They want us to be what they couldn't finish." Far away, aboard a different ship in another sector, Hal stood in front of a council of Kryn elders. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice steady. He had broadcast the vision already, let it spread through assembly channels, past firewalls, past restrictions. The message couldn't be revoked now. They left their weapons, he said. They left their failures. But they also left a map. The silence that followed wasn't doubt. It was fear. Back aboard the relic station, Tessa sat with the weapon beside her once again, now glowing faintly. Not waiting. Not sleeping. Listening. The world of Vornkale spun on the edge of collapse. Orbiting a dying sun, and once the core of Veari governance, it had since become a no-man's land, a place even the Kryn avoided. But now both fleets converged there. Kryn dreadforms held position along the planet's magnetosphere. THRSS vessels hung in a loose net across the far side of the system, pulsing with dormant energy, their weapons quiet. For now, in the middle of this contested airspace drifted the weapon, a gravity engine older than recorded conflict, reactivated by unknown hands. If it reached full charge, not only Vornkale but every object within 5 light minutes would be pulled apart molecule by molecule. The THRSS called it the necessary reckoning. The Kryn called it unwelcome. Tessa called it insane. Inside the command cradle of her hybrid craft, half Kryn warplane, half Veari relic, Tessa sat strapped to an interface web that pulsed in time with her heart. She no longer needed to speak to be understood. Thought was enough. Kaver sat beside her, body strapped into a co-pilot rig too small for his frame. He didn't seem to mind. His expression remained fixed on the display, which showed the gravity engine blooming open, like a flower made of fractured moons. 3 minutes, he said. Send the last transmission, Tessa replied. The signal shot across the divide, encrypted, focused, and sharp. It reached Hal, who stood inside a Kryn data chamber deep within a neutral station. He didn't speak. He simply activated the final piece of the Veari memory code. The projection triggered across both fleets. Not sound, not visuals, but shared context. They saw what Tessa had seen in the relic chamber, the battlefield that hadn't ended in conquest but in stillness. The unknown figure. The moment the war broke, not from impact but refusal. For many watching, the image lasted seconds. For others it lodged deeper, scraping at the architecture of hate they'd carried for too long. Some ships shut down their weapons. Others powered up. Tessa didn't wait to see which side chose what. She dropped her ship into the planet's gravity well, slicing through layers of debris, ice fields, and old bones left from centuries of skirmish. The engine loomed below, shielded by tendrils of warped metal and rotating plates of star-forged matter. The interface web clamped around her ribs. Once we lock, we can't disarm remotely, Kaver warned. I know. Then we die here. I know that too. The weapon's core opened as she approached. It recognized the relic embedded in her hull. Recognized the imprint of her implant. It welcomed her. She didn't return the greeting. Instead, she sent a final override, one the Veari had left as a failsafe, a release not triggered by dominance but mutual sacrifice. A key that required not lineage but intention. The engine stalled, then reversed. Tessa's ship was caught in the burst radius. From orbit, it looked like a silent ripple, a sphere of inverted light, passing through the gravity engine and peeling its layers apart one by one, like a flower folding in on itself. The relic was gone. So was the weapon. Kryn and THRSS ships halted. No orders were spoken. Just silence. Then gradually retreats began. Not a truce. Not a treaty. Just space growing between them. Days later, Hal stood alone in the ruins of the Kryn command deck. Debris floated. Fire suppression foam clung to the walls like moss. Tessa's name was being recorded now, not as savior, not as martyr, but as fulcrum. She had given them all a reason to stop, even if only for a while. Far from the wreckage, in an old Veari archive never fully mapped, a dormant structure stirred. A shape moved beneath it, small, bipedal, unformed. Not human. Not Kryn. Not THRSS. But something new. It opened its eyes, and the walls recognized it,